My son-in-law tapped my chest twice like you tap a service bell and said, "The help should wait outside." The whole table laughed. My daughter just stared at her water. I didn't laugh. I aligned my knife with the plate. The candlelight flashed across the embroidered logo on the napkin Northbridge Dynamics. His new job, which he was so arrogant about. That was the same name I quietly signed to the restructuring documents 4 years ago. I didn't raise my voice. I looked at the embossed crest like it was a clock. If he thinks this suit is staff, wait until he sees whose name is carved on the executive board. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The room smelled like rosemary and melted butter. Evan leaned back in his chair with that restless ease of a man who loves a room more when it is watching him. "Staff vibes, Graham," he said, flicking the lapel once more as if he could shake off 30 years of wear. "It fits me fine," I said. Nora shifted in her seat. "Please not tonight," she whispered, and the ice in her glass chimed against the rim like a tiny bell no one else could hear. We were at a long table near the window, the kind of restaurant whose candles made faces important and menus heavy. I watched the silver bread knife catch a strand of light and draw a thin line on the linen. Across from me, the napkin crest was stitched in a tidy circle. Northbridge Dynamics. That name had followed me for 4 years without ever saying it out loud. It lived on filing tabs and board minutes and the corner of a brass plaque in a hallway that smelled faintly of toner and carpet glue. People think power arrives with a trumpet. I learned it usually comes folded like a napkin. Evan launched into his toast without waiting for the server. "To new chapters," he said. "To Northbridge finally recruiting people who can move the needle." He adjusted his cuff like he expected applause. Forks clinked. Someone at the far end said, "Hear, hear," and Nora looked at me as if measuring distance to the door. I set the knife parallel again, edge inward, the way Elise liked me to do when we had company. A habit is a small mercy. It gives your hands something to do while your mind does not take the bait. The server arrived with bread warm enough to fog his hand. He placed the basket by my left elbow and slid a card into a leather sleeve beside the water jug. The card was not a wine list. It was a printed insert. I read the top line without moving it. Northbridge Dynamics welcome new hires. There was a small logo, the same clean circle stitched into the napkin, and beneath it a line about community partners. The insert did not name me. It would not. It only named the partnership program I had insisted on when the company was pulled upright. Apprenticeships for veterans, paid, real tools, no speeches. Evan noticed the card a heartbeat later. He grinned at Nora and nudged it with a fingertip. "Look at that," he said. "They know how to do it right. The whole city is playing host." He tucked the insert back into the sleeve like a souvenir. I let the moment sit. The room continued its hum plates whispering against linen chairs, scooting someone laughing too brightly near the bar. I should tell you something about the thread Elise used to tease me about. She never pulled it. She would press her finger to it and look at me the way a good engineer looks at a hairline crack in a bridge. There is a right time to cut and a wrong way to tug. She had a way of making patience practical. When she was gone, I kept the thread and the patience both. I learned to stand in a room and let other people declare who they think I am. The server poured wine for Evan first. Evan raised his glass and leaned forward, so we had to lean back to avoid his sleeve. He said I asked about leadership pathways today, and I like what I heard. They want builders. They want confidence. And they are done with the old guard who made the turnaround but do not understand scale. He smirked to himself. The turnaround men, he said, like a story you listen to for 5 minutes and then tell better. I watched his reflection in the water. The napkin crest looked like a coin at the bottom of a glass. Nora's hand rested near the stem of her glass and trembled once before she laid it flat on the table. She is my daughter. She has her mother's kindness and my stubbornness and a fierce loyalty that sometimes runs in the wrong direction until it runs out of breath. I did not rescue a company to crush my son-in-law in front of her. I did not build a life to spend it taking bows. The first plates arrived. Scallops that smelled like a bright morning, a steak that landed with a soft thud, greens that glistened with oil. The knife in my hand found its line again. Evan said, "Let me order for the table," which was the most predictable sentence of the night. The server nodded as if relieved, then glanced at me and said, "Mr. Whitaker, would you like your usual side?" It was a small slip. He knew me. Raphael, the manager, had known me for years because when you partner with a place to host apprenticeship interviews once a quarter, they learn your name and your habit of overpaying for coffee. Evan said he knows you. I said he is polite to everyone who tips the staff without asking for gratitude. Evan smiled as if he had won a small point. Then he leaned in. He said big companies need fresh blood because old loyalties go stale. He said I plan to move fast. He said the board loves momentum. The board, I said, and let the words sit in my mouth like a seed. He did not hear the echo. Some men think a hallway is a stage until the glass teaches them otherwise. Nora pressed her napkin to her knee and tried again. Please not tonight, she said under her breath. I looked at her and nodded. I was not going to make a scene. I was going to make a note. The card in its leather sleeve, the crest, the word board, the way Evan moved when he said it. People reveal themselves in the words they choose to flex. Elise used to say you can read a person by what they reach for when the bread lands. The server refilled our water. The knife slipped from the edge of my plate and made a clear ring against porcelain. It was a pure sound, tiny but honest. I let it be the period at the end of an unspoken sentence. Dignity is not a lack of options. It is the decision to use the right one later. After dinner, I walked Nora to the curb. The night had that streetlight gold that makes even cold air look kind. She asked me if I was angry. I told her anger is a quick lighter and tonight needs a pilot light. She laughed because she knows my bad metaphors, then said she was sorry for the way he spoke. I said he is young. She said not that young. I said you do not owe me an apology for anyone else's mouth. She said I should have said something at the table. I said you will when it matters, and I will make sure it matters in a room that does not need wine to listen. At home, the kitchen was the kind of quiet you can lean against. I rinsed a plate that did not need rinsing and set the silver bread knife in its slot. My fingers found the lapel thread without thinking. Elise would have smiled. I took off the jacket and folded it over the back of a chair, careful not to snag anything. The insert card from the restaurant had found its way into my pocket. I did not remember putting it there. Northbridge Dynamics welcome new hires. The font was clean, the logo honest. On the back was a tiny line of type about community partners. No names, just the program we wrote when we engineered the turnaround. I slid the card under a magnet on the fridge, a reminder that some doors open better from the hinge than the handle. My phone buzzed on the counter. A calendar reminder from a name that has never once called me by my first. General Council meeting, routine governance. 3 days from now. In the reflection of the screen, I could see the curve of the bread knife and the little blink of the refrigerator light. I thought about how many rooms I have sat in where people enjoyed the sound of their own certainty. Then I thought about that napkin crest catching candlelight and the simple way a sewing machine bites cloth to make a circle. I turned off the kitchen light and the house shifted into its night sounds. Pipes settling, the old floor answering itself. I stood in the doorway a breath longer and listened for anyone still laughing. There was only the small ring in my memory where the knife had touched porcelain like a bell struck once and left to fade. Tomorrow I would water the roses, iron the jacket. See a man about a policy I wrote 2 winters ago and sharpen the pencil I use for the notes I never raised my voice to read. Tonight I let the thread be a thread and the crest be a crest and the dignity be the choice I could still make. In the dark I could still see the stitched circle. I could still feel the weight of the knife aligned with the plate. I could still hear Evan say, staff vibes, Graham like a boy tapping a sign he cannot read. It fits me fine, I had said, and it did. I have never minded a suit that remembers its work. My late wife Elise taught me to let money speak softly and documents speak clearly. She did not love numbers for themselves. She loved what could be built when numbers did their job quietly. I hear her in the way I turn a key. I hear her in the way I choose a pen over a mouth. The safe sits behind a shelf of paperbacks that still smell like the sun on a porch. Brass against knuckle, the dial gives under the pads of my fingers. I turn past 0 slow until the notch finds the first memory reverse to the second, then forward again. The door yields with a small patience. Cold air moves like a breath. Inside is what we kept instead of trophies, a ledger with a cracked spine, a folder of certificates that are more promise than pride. Tabs in 3 colors because Elise believed color should carry meaning where words can get lost. Blue for tax years, graphite for entities, rust for agreements that hold strangers together longer than handshakes do. I place the ledger on the table and stand for a second listening to the house. A pipe decides to settle. The refrigerator hums. Somewhere in the yard, an unseen bird argues with morning. I sit and pull the fountain pen toward me. Elise found it in a shop that smelled like cedar and ink, and she laughed at the way I tested every nib. She said, "You do not need an expensive pen." I said, "That is why I will keep this one for life." She nodded and said, "Then let it write things that outlast us." I do not add numbers today. I trace old ones. I turn pages until my finger lands on the year the weather changed. Blue tab. The paper has that slight give that good paper gives when you press too hard. Notes in the margin where Elise wrote in her careful hand why this choice would make the next one easier. We never rushed. We built scaffolding and let time harden it. I told myself never shout a number sign a line. Graphite tab. Entities. The first time I wrote Cedarline Holdings in ink, it felt like naming a road that had always existed, but no one had paved. We did not create it to hide. We created it to organize, to give shape to risk so that risk would not leak into the kitchen and sour the coffee. I can hear Julia Hahn the way people hear the voice of a good coach long after the game. Structure buys you peace. I flip to rust. Agreements. I move through them the way a mason moves a hand over a wall he finished last winter. Here is a covenant with a lender who will not remember my face but remembers my timing. Here is a consent signed by a board chair who, to her credit, read every page before she wrote her name. Here is a stipulation that looks like a sentence and acts like a bridge. Paper is not magic. It is a tool with teeth. The right clause at the right time can hold back a tide without anyone seeing the dam. I stop at a page that still carries the scent of toner. The heading is simple: Covenant Reset. A date that now lives in more calendars than mine. On that week, the company you heard at dinner was a body with a heartbeat but a failing rhythm. Ratios do not care who raised a glass last quarter. They only care if the blood is moving where it must. Cedarline did not throw a rope and drag it to shore. Cedarline picked a new shoreline and moved the tide line 3 paces back. We sat with lenders who had never once looked past their screens and asked them to pick up a pencil. We drew a smaller box for the pressure to live in. We gave the company breath and time and room to learn. If I sound proud, I am not. I am grateful that paper can still be used to save rather than to strip. I can see the boardroom even now. Lights too bright for human eyes. Coffee that had been heated one time too many. A coat rack with a single wool coat on it long after winter ended because the owner liked the way the sleeves fell from the hanger. I said little. When asked, I answered once. When contradicted, I listened. When the lender asked what if I slid the term sheet forward and let the ink do the talking. I do not know if anyone there believed that quiet could carry weight. By the end of the week, they stopped asking the question. There was a morning after that reset when Elise made eggs and leaned her hip into the counter the way she used to. She said, "You will not put our name on a wall." I said, "No." She said, "You will not buy a car we do not need." I said, "No." She said, "Then, what will you do?" I said, "I will teach through the work, and I will make sure the next person has a way in that does not require a cousin." She smiled and said, "Then you will make me good coffee." I walked to the window and let the light find the brass of the safe dial. A small halo. It takes nothing to turn a dial. It takes years to learn when to turn it. I place the fountain pen in the groove at the spine, and for a moment I do nothing. I let the memory of that boardroom fade and the table in my kitchen take its place. I think about how often men like Evan confuse volume for velocity, how often a room will believe the loudest thing is the truest. Markets do it too. They rise on applause and fall on facts. I do not fault anyone for being young. I fault them for ignoring the door that is held open for them while they pound on a window. On the next page is a copy of the apprenticeship charter. Stipends timed to skills mastered. Hours logged on real projects, not photo opportunities. A line that keeps politics and last names out of placement. Another that lets supervisors recommend permanently with a paragraph, not a favor. It is small compared to the deals that make headlines. It saved more lives than the headlines ever would. Not in the heroic sense. In the sense of rent paid on the 1st, chest unclenched on the 15th. Kids who stop asking why the lights sometimes stay off. I close the ledger. The pen cap clicks and the sound is final in a way I trust. The kettle wakes and then sings. Steam fogs the lower pane for a heartbeat and clears. I rinse the cup Elise liked because the handle fits 2 fingers, not 3. I pour and stand listening to the thin whistle settle back into the metal. True security is engineered, not displayed. You place weight where the beam can hold it. You do not dance on the edge of a roof because a camera is pointed your way. I carry the cup to the sink and set it down without a sound. Back at the table, the tabs sit like small flags. Blue graphite rust. Tax. Entity. Agreement. They have become a ritual. Ritual is not superstition when it calms your hands long enough to make a competent decision. I slide the ledger back into the safe. The dial turns. The door latches with the kind of certainty that does not need to be loud. On the counter, the phone glows with a message from Nora. She says she got home safe. She says she is sorry again. She says she will talk to him. I type a reply that is lighter than the weight I feel. I tell her to sleep. I tell her to drink water. I tell her she does not have to carry anyone else's lesson to the car. I move the jacket from the chair to the hook and smooth the lapel with my palm. The thread is still there, soft as a memory you refuse to pluck because you know the jacket will hold better with a reminder stitched into it. I open the back door and step out to the small yard. The air is honest in the way air is when nothing is performing. The roses will want water soon. I will give it when the sun lifts. Behind me, the kettle ticks down and falls quiet. In a few days, the company will host a welcome session for new hires. Someone will stand at a lectern and thank a partner that does not brag. A plaque will catch a finger of light in a hallway no one photographs. A young man in a good suit will walk past both and decide whether learning or posturing is the faster road. I have been wrong about people and I have been surprised. Either way, the documents will be ready. The doors will be on their hinges. And if a number needs to be spoken, it will not be shouted. It will arrive as ink where it belongs. Ambition looks sharpest on a man who hasn't learned where the edges cut. I saw that edge in Evan's smile when he came by the next afternoon, the kind of smile that wants to be a key. He stood in my living room turning a key fob with the Carver monogram against his knuckles. Nora set 2 mugs on the coffee table and chose the one with the tiny chip only we ever notice. Light through the blinds laid thin ladders across the rug. The house smelled like citrus cleaner and the last of the morning coffee. Evan did not sit until the silence told him it was his turn. He started with praise because men who want doors open have learned that compliments are oil. He said, "I admire how you keep things organized." He said, "We could all benefit from your system." He said, "Transparency builds trust." I heard Elise laugh where people laugh when someone tries to sell you what already belongs to you. "Trust builds transparency when it's earned," I said, and let the sentence sit on the table between the mugs. He nodded as if we agreed, and then unfolded a folder like a napkin. He had rehearsed this. Pages clipped cover letter printed everything measured to look inevitable. He described a family trust for transparency. He used words that feel safe because they sound like they mean safety. He said co-trustees share the burden. He said co-signatures prevent mistakes. He said alignment is clean governance. He did not use the word control. He did not need to. Nora listened with her hands clasped as if she were praying not to be asked to choose. She loves the idea of harmony, and she has spent her life trying to host it. She looked at me over the rim of her mug, and even her eyes asked permission to hope. I watched her mouth tighten at a line that sounded too polished, and then relax when he remembered to smile. My daughter has learned to read people and unlearn herself in the same breath when she thinks love demands it. I do not hold that against her. I owed her a house where she did not have to arbitrate between the men who wanted to lead it. Evan pushed the folder forward so the pages breathed. He said nothing binding yet. He said a draft is only a conversation. He tapped a paragraph that used the phrase shared governance twice before the period. He said this keeps everyone honest. He said you can appoint me temporary co-trustee until we formalize. He said the word temporary like a coat someone borrows for winter and forgets to return in spring. I looked at the folder and then at Nora. I asked Evan what problem the trust solves that a plain boundary does not. He blinked as if expecting applause for the vocabulary and meeting a question instead. He said clarity. He said peace of mind. He said we will make fewer errors if we all sign together. He still had not said control. I did not get angry. I got practical. I told him a family that cannot honor a boundary will not honor a document. I told him governance is not a costume you borrow. I told him transparency built on suspicion does not heal. Suspicion, it feeds it new sentences to hide behind. He smiled with his mouth and not his eyes. He said, of course, just a draft, just a start, we can revisit, we can tweak. I said, we will not revisit. I said, our family already has a structure and it is not a committee. I pushed the folder back without touching it longer than a second. His key fob stopped rolling. Nora exhaled as if a small stone had been put down and another picked up. She said, can we slow down? She said the word slow as if it might split the air. Evan stood, smoothed his tie, and put the folder under his arm. He said, we are all on the same side. He said he was late for an errand. He said he would circle back with a cleaner draft that reflects everyone's comfort. He said comfort like an anesthetic. After he left, Nora hovered in the doorway. She said he is trying Dad. She said he wants to feel included. I said inclusion is not ownership, and a draft can be a knife when the person holding it calls it a spoon. She smiled at the image because she does that when the truth arrives, wearing my worst metaphors. Then she asked if I would consider a small step, some signal that I trust him. I said I will give him my time, my attention, and a chance to learn that power is not a speed. I said I will not sign my spine into a group. She nodded slowly and kissed my cheek as if she were apologizing for having two loyalties in one body. I watched her walk to the car through the front window, and I did not wish for any other daughter. The house went quiet in that particular way houses do after a visit, like a pond, unwrinkling after a tossed stone. I rinsed the mugs. The key fob sound still knocked around in the room like a small coin falling from one shelf of my mind to another. The second scene came 2 days later in a parking lot that pretended to be a plaza. New glass reflected old brick. Food trucks sold sincerity in compostable cups. Evan texted I am nearby. He wanted to grab 5 minutes. I said sure and left the hardware store with a small bag of screws that never quite matched the ones you were trying to replace. He pulled in with music that wanted to be seen. He got out still talking to someone on his headset. He ended the call at my shoulder but did not pocket the energy. He walked me toward a bench with the kind of swagger men wear when they are trying the fit of a suit they have never paid for. He said Northbridge is everything he expected and more. He said they need momentum, and he has momentum. He said he talked to a vice president about strategic pathways and hinted at board access within a few years if he hits targets. He laughed at the word years like a comedian selling a punchline that has not arrived. He held up the key fob and spun it again while he talked. It flashed in the sun like a lure. He said I should not worry because the trust is not about control. He said it is about clarity. He said the board loves clear lines. He said transparency builds trust and repeated it with a rhythm like a line he once printed on a slide. I said trust builds transparency when it's earned. He blinked as if he had heard it before and could not place where. He pivoted back to the company and how the new hire cohort is full of promise and noise. He said he plans to be the signal. He told me he had been invited to a welcome night and that he might be asked to say a few words as a standout hire. He said the phrase standout hire and looked for confirmation the way a diver looks for the surface. I did not give or withhold it. I listened to the way the word board sat in his mouth like it belonged to him by pronunciation alone. I wondered if anyone had taught him the difference between a ladder and a polished wall. He checked his phone and frowned. Unread Northbridge onboarding email. The subject line asked him to complete forms he thought beneath him. He said, administrative friction, and rolled his eyes as if the company owed him an assistant before it owed him a job. He set the phone face down on the bench as if ignoring a task erased it. Then he put his foot up on the seating and tied his shoe as if he had climbed something. He asked how I felt about new beginnings. He asked if I had ever moved too slowly and regretted it. He asked if I could picture a future where our families planned together at a proper scale. He spoke the word scale like someone testing the volume on a speaker system. I told him scale without structure is a crowd. I told him a right pace is not timid, it is durable. I told him a good house stands because someone said no to a shortcut long before the ribbon was cut. He laughed almost kindly and called me old school. He said old school is a compliment. He said he would learn what I know and build on it faster. He said the board loves momentum again because he liked the way the sentence made him taller. He grabbed his phone, saw another reminder, and groaned. He said onboarding is a time tax. He said his calendar was full. He asked what he should prioritize. I told him to read every form with his whole attention and sign nothing he does not understand. He said he is not worried. He said he can charm someone to explain it over coffee. I let the breeze lift that remark and take it somewhere far from me. We parted at the curb. He slapped my shoulder the way men do when they want to feel how solid the thing they are leaning on might be. His key fob clipped his knuckle and he winced before he laughed. He called over his shoulder that he would send the revised draft. I said, "Do not." He waved it away as if no meant maybe. He got into the car and the music wanted to be seen again. As I crossed the street, my phone buzzed. Calendar invite, Northbridge welcome night. The subject line named the auditorium I know by its dry air and its lights that never dim quite enough. I accepted. The screen brightened a little and then sank back into itself. Control disguised as shared governance is still control. A key fob is still a key even when it is spun like jewelry. Somewhere in the distance, a delivery truck reversed slow and steady, the alarm ticking backward like a metronome trying to teach a song how to keep time. If someone pulls your thread, you check whose fingers are on it. I started with the easy cloth first. Public records do not argue. They simply sit where you left them. County databases, corporate registries, 2 trade publications that archive more disappointment than celebration. The search bar blinked like a patient dog. I typed Carver and let the pages populate without forcing a story onto them. Property records tell you how a person thinks about tomorrow. The Carver home had a refinance at a rate that made sense when the world was louder. 2 vehicles leased under a shell with a name that tried to sound like a trust and read like a purchase. A lake rental in summer, not owned but frequented. The thin paper trail of a life built to be seen from the curb. No crime, no scandal, just a preference for mirrors. I printed what belonged to no one's embarrassment and set each sheet in a neat stack. Gray manila folder already labeled waited on the table. NB-GOV 2021. I do not scribble when detail deserves a steady hand. A pen clicks a single note in an otherwise hushed room. I slide an index card from the drawer and write 3 dates because dates are the knots where stories hold the turnaround year, the governance reform month, the day the new committee bylaws took their first breath. I tuck the card in the folder's lip. Later, I will know where to look without looking hard. Coffee with a banker is an old ritual. The branch manager at East Maple has weathered 4 cycles in 1 sabbatical. He knows how to talk around things without disrespecting the need to be clear. We sat near the window so I could watch the morning put up its shoulders. He stirred, then did not sweeten. He told me what he tells every cautious client when a name comes across a desk. Lifestyle financed by optimism. The tilt of his voice made optimism sound like a decent neighbor who borrows tools and sometimes forgets to bring them back. Optimism is a tough collateral, I said, and he nodded as if we had both just agreed to pay a bill on time. He would not give me what the law does not allow. He did not need to. A banker's anecdotes arrive like weather reports from a county over, close enough to keep you from getting wet, far enough not to be gossip. Their family carries a large balance between appearances and income, he said, without the he and she. Consulting on the father's side promises of growth on the son's. Nothing reckless, just tight. Tight is a word that means fine until it does not. I paid for both coffees and left a tip as if someone else needed a reason to come back here on their lunch break. Outside, a truck idled inside. A woman pushed an overloaded cart and laughed to herself about nothing I could hear. The world kept doing its honest work. Back home, the printer hummed a path through the afternoon. I ran what I had through the scanner because paper likes to disappear when it thinks it is safe. The lid came down like a slow eyelid, the light bar made its quiet sweep, and the machine spit out a certainty you could email. I saved everything with names that would still make sense if I had to open them at 3 in the morning. Then I made the call I knew would end where it always does, with a ridiculous amount of calm. Julia Hahn answered on the second ring. She never says hello like a question. She knows the difference between urgency and drama. We spoke in sentences built to hold their own weight. I summarized. She listened. She asked what I wanted, not what I wished. I told her I wanted a map, not a war. She said governance is a skeleton. You only notice it when it is broken. She reminded me that curiosity had borders. Keep it legal and human, she said. I asked when human stops people from being foolish. She said never, then laughed once, then grew quiet again. I could see her in my mind circling a date on a pad only she reads. Do you remember the reform year, I asked? She did. The room, the bitter coffee, the coat on the rack. She said the reforms did what they were supposed to do. Clean lines, real committees, no more honorary titles for friends of friends. She paused there. Names, I said, and we both let that hang until it no longer needed to be spoken. She told me she would send a memo to confirm process if process came knocking. She told me she trusted my hands to stay open. I told her open hands are still hands. After we hung up, I returned to the folder. NB-GOV 2021 stared back with the plain authority of a stamped box in a storage room. I added a second index card because sometimes you need to keep one in the folder and one in your pocket. On the new card, I wrote one line without a name. Advisory seat request declined under new bylaws. The 2021 decision. I did not need the name to remember it. Malcolm Carver had shaken hands with a room that was no longer giving out chairs. Not because he was unworthy, not because the company wanted to slight him, but because the architecture had changed and honorary rafters had been replaced with load-bearing beams. I did not plan to use that line. I planned to know it so I would not be surprised if someone else tried to write me into an older chapter. The weight of that sentence sat in my pocket exactly right, not heavy, not light, just enough to remind me to stand with both feet on the floor. While the documents saved and the scanner cooled, I checked the unread messages and found one from Nora. A picture of a dog I have never met wearing a cone. She captioned it with nothing but the dog's name and a heart. Ordinary mercy that unknots the jaw. I let the image sit on the screen while the computer flashed a progress bar for files that did not care about dogs. Evening came as if it had been scheduled. The window turned from mirror to postcard. I put water on, then took it off before it sang, because sometimes silence is more useful than tea. In that quiet, the mind will fill anything you let it. I let it replay the banker's word tight and the counsel's phrase clean lines. I laid those phrases next to the facts I had printed and did not try to force them into an argument. I looked at what was there. A son who wants shortcuts to sound like strategy. A father who once wanted a seat because the old rules rewarded proximity. New rules that ask for discipline instead of dinner invitations. I could have called Evan and let the gravity of what I knew tug at his tone. I did not. Information is leverage. It can also be a light. If you point it at someone's eyes, they will flinch. If you set it on the table, they might read by it. I stacked the papers into the gray folder and pressed the metal prongs flat. The folder closed with the modest finality of a drawer finding its frame. When you spend a life around people who mistake certainty for wisdom, you learn to trust the small finishes. The scanner lid shut with a soft thump. The screen reflected my face against a desktop that looked like a calm lake with labeled stones at the bottom. Outside, the neighborhood dialed itself down. A porch light clicked on across the street. An engine coughed and then remembered how to be quiet. I took the second index card, the one from my pocket, and slid it behind my driver's license. The dates pressed against my palm for a second. The 2021 decision. Not a weapon, not a secret, just a context. If someone tried to make a committee out of my spine again, I would have a polite sentence to place between us and see if it held. I turned off the lamp and let the monitor darken on its own. The window had moved from dusk to night while I was deciding what not to do. Night is generous when you have behaved. It lets you hear what you did not say and be grateful for the restraint. Before I left the room, I checked the folder one more time. NB-GOV 2021. The label looked like a thin mouth resisting the urge to speak. Good. I left it closed. The house made its soft adjustments and the world backed away from my windows. Information had taken a chair. It would not throw it. It would be ready if asked. Leverage is only as humane as the hands holding it. I washed my hands, though they were not dirty, and watched the water choose the drain it was told to choose. Then the screen in the next room caught a reflection of me grayer than I remember, and the night moved a shade deeper toward dawn. Some places remember you by how you pay the bill, others by why. I held the door for Nora and Evan and let the early evening crowd brush past like a soft tide. The host stand glowed under a small brass lamp. Beside it, half hidden by a vase of eucalyptus, a narrow plaque caught a sliver of light. Names are quieter on metal than they are in mouths. That is why I prefer them there. Rafael Ortiz stood where he always stands, hands open, smile that respects the room more than it advertises himself. He greeted Nora first because he knows who leads with grace. Then his eyes found me the way an old street finds your tires without you steering. "Mr. Whitaker, welcome back." He said it like a kindness, not a line. Evan looked from Rafael to the plaque to me, quick quick little darts that wanted a pattern and did not get one. We were led to a corner table that sees everything while pretending not to, cloth heavy enough to quiet a careless fork, candle steady, not dramatic, the kind of room that keeps your secrets and sends you home fed. Evan appraised it the way men appraise a mirror. He runs a good house, he said, as if he were grading a portfolio. He tugged his sleeve and sat where the view included both the bar and the hallway to the private dining room. Nora sat between us as if to keep two currents from arguing with a chair. Menus came like hardcover books. Water arrived in a glass that hummed when you touched it. I read the first page without moving my eyes. I did not come here for flourishes. I came to see what a room does when it remembers. Raphael returned with our server and a small nod that meant he would handle the first moments himself. "Your table is our pleasure," he said to all three of us, then let his attention rest on me as if he were placing a hand on a familiar banister. "Mr. Whitaker, we appreciate your support. The program is changing lives." His voice was natural, a low chord you could miss if you were trying to. I did not miss it. Evan did not, either. Support Evan said a single word lifted up and examined against the candlelight. He did not disguise the question. He looked at me as if the word itself had bumped his elbow. I cut a small triangle of bread and set the knife back down parallel to the plate. "Raphael runs a good room," I said. That was all. Raphael inclined his head, understood the sentence I did not say, and stepped back into the current of his floor. The server described a special as if she were reading a weather report. Nora listened and smiled and ordered something she could eat without thinking about it. Evan asked for a steak because he believes steak travels with statements. I asked for the scallops because they arrive like a clean morning. The server left the leather check presenter in its slot at the edge of the table, brass emblem catching the candle like a wink. Even with its mouth closed, a check presenter holds a kind of future. Evan tried for brightness. He said the week had been strong. He said onboarding was a formality. He said he had already set 2 meetings with people who matter. He said the company wanted leaders who could be seen. Nora asked about his teammates and whether anyone had made him feel welcome. He said everyone was energized. He said it with that thin shine people use when they have not learned names yet. The breadbasket made a small tour and I let it pass me twice before I took anything. When I did, I kept my hands slow. Doors open better that way. Evan watched Raphael cross the room to speak to a couple in a corner, watched him settle a problem with a glance and a hand on a shoulder. He asked how long we had been coming here. I told him long enough to know the Tuesday roast is better on Thursday. He laughed, grateful for a sentence that did not test anything. Dinner arrived with the modest fanfare of plates placed exactly where they belong. Evan admired his steak. Nora admired how well the room kept separate conversations from stepping on each other. I admired the simple competence that makes a dining room breathe like a good machine. Raphael passed again and paused just enough to say, "The apprentices did well the last quarter." He spoke to the table, not to me because pride belongs in the air, not on a lapel. Evan's fork hesitated over his second bite. "Apprentices," he said, and let the word float as if it might fetch its own history. He looked toward the host stand and saw the plaque again. The vase had been moved 2 inches. The names were easier to read now. He squinted and then stopped himself from leaning. He turned back quickly, mouth-neutral eyes calculating a puzzle with half the pieces hidden under the napkin. Nora excused herself for a moment with the softness of someone who refuses to make an exit into a scene. Evan waited until she was gone and then asked if I knew Raphael from anything beyond dinners and good service. "Rooms earn relationships," I said. "Some nights they need help doing it." He let that be a riddle he could not solve and changed the subject to mentors and visibility, and how quickly reputation can be built if you start with the right audience. He said he planned to find the right audience soon. He said it the way a man stares at a ladder and decides how many rungs to skip. I sipped water until the glass became a mirror and I could see my face where a plan should be. We spoke about Nora's new project at work. She lit up in a way I have not seen her light up in weeks. Evan listened and smiled and checked his phone when it buzzed. A reminder flashed and dimmed a little blue slice on a screen that runs many lives at once. He set it face down as if he were setting down a coin. The room kept us company without intruding. That is the highest grade a room can earn. When the plates had been cleared and the first draft of comfort had been signed by silence, Raphael returned with coffee that did not need selling. He placed a cup in front of each of us, and then set the leather presenter by my right hand as he always does. The brass emblem caught the candle again. A tiny crest, no words. He said the apprentices are meeting a Northbridge team next week, and he thanked me again, gentle as a hand on a doorknob. I nodded once. Evan watched me sign the receipt as if the angle of my wrist might answer his questions better than my mouth. I wrote G.M. Whitaker in the line that forgets names by morning. Ink dried in a smooth line. I left the tip I leave for people who make a hard job look easy. My pen clicked in a soft way Elise always liked. Raphael took the booklet as if he were lifting something valuable off a shelf, not because of the number inside, but because of what could be built with its reason. As we stood, Evan's eyes touched the plaque again. Cedar Line Apprentices Fund, it said, among other names, partnered with Northbridge Dynamics. The letters were not large. You had to want to read them. He wanted to and did not want to at the same time. He turned his face toward the door, held the handle for Nora when she returned, and let the night air cool whatever his mind had begun to heat. On the sidewalk, traffic made its usual river sounds. Nora thanked Raphael by name the way good people thank everyone who helps them pass through a space with their dignity intact. Evan adjusted his cuff as if it had betrayed him. We walked to the curb where the light is kind and unambitious. Reputation leaks through service doors, not press releases. If a room knows you by why you pay, it does not need your speech. I felt the slip of carbon paper through leather when Raphael tore the merchant copy. I watched the place where the ink had settled and then lifted. Signatures are brief. The rooms they build are not. When I looked up, Evan's face had gone somewhere I could not read. It was not anger. It was not admiration. It was a pause that did not know where to land. The ink on my name shone once under the lamp and dried. Then the street took back its sounds and we went our separate directions without anyone saying a thing that needed to be said. Halls echo what people forget they once said. I heard it through my phone before I saw anything. The gentle thrum of neon, the soft chop of a projector fan turning an empty wall into certainty, shoes on carpet thudding like careful hearts. Evan had sent a video without a caption. It opened on an entryway I know as well as my own kitchen. Frosted glass with the Northbridge sigil. A receptionist's smile that works like good air. The camera wobbled, steadied, then followed a small river of new hires into Echo Hall. Orientation days always smell like new paper and hope. In the video, a tote bag rested against every chair, a small gift with a notebook and a pen, and the idea that today is the first square in a neat calendar. Evan's lens drifted across a bag so we could read the printed line about integrity and velocity. He did not linger on the words. The video rose and fell as he walked. The mic caught whispers he was not meant to record, and the room did what rooms do when they think they are safe. A voice welcomed them. Lila Moreno. I have heard her bring a room to attention just by letting silence sit. We honor quiet partners, she said somewhere near the front where the light throws a pale rectangle on the screen. The camera flicked from the stage to the side wall, then back. A coworker leaned near Evan and said under the hum, "Cedar Line saved our skin." The words carried the easy gratitude of someone who understood weather without learning the barometer. Slides began. A timeline ran like a clean spine down the screen. Early days. Growth. The bad year everyone survived by pretending it would be worse for the other person. Then the turnaround. The slide changed again, and there it was, a photo pressed into the corner of a story. The 2021 signing. Not art. Just a table and a handful of people who looked tired and agreed to agree. In the grain of the picture, my name lived where names live when they do not ask to be introduced. The camera dipped a little. Evan was breathing through his mouth. The video shifted to the aisle. He had left his seat. A bronze donor wall waited outside the doors where the air runs cooler. He walked toward it with the jerky focus of a man who has just remembered a detail from last night and finds it living in metal. The panel glowed under museum lights. He moved too close and the autofocus blinked like a thinking eye. Then it sharpened. Cedar Line Holdings. Principal, G.M. Whitaker. It is a small line. It was always meant to be small. If you are looking for trumpets, you will not find them in bronze. His thumb trembled against the glass of the phone. The image quivered. He stepped back and caught a wider view. The company's crest above. Other partners listed left and right. No confetti. Just names doing the work names were hired to do. He did not say a word. The mic captured only the thin sigh a machine makes when it remembers to breathe. The video cut itself off the way nervous fingers end a thought. A second clip began without warning. Back inside the hall. A slide titled "Our Turnaround" loaded more slowly than it should have because Wi-Fi has a sense of humor around pride. Lila's voice said the word covenant and the word patient and the phrase new discipline like she was reading a mechanic's invoice out loud. There was a picture of the donor wall we had just seen and the same small line under cedar line. "We honor quiet partners," she said again, not as a flourish but as a checklist item they intended to keep. My roses needed pruning. I set the phone on the porch rail and clipped back a stubborn cane. Sun pooled on the steps. The thorns pressed against the glove like small arguments. I have never minded thorns. They turn handling into attention. The phone buzzed twice more but did not announce what wanted in. I let it sit. Work like this is better with both hands. When I picked up the phone again, I saw a group photo taken too close by someone short. Faces half-cropped. Tote bags in the lower frame like a pattern. Evan had drawn a circle around the bronze wall visible through the doorway. No text. He sent one more still image. The plaque alone. The line we both recognized centered as if the wall itself had chosen to zoom. I sent back a picture of my pruning shears resting on the rail. No text. He would understand that sometimes a tool says more honestly why it exists than the mouth holding it. Nora called and I let it ring until the last possible moment so I could put down the shears and take the call with nothing in my hands. She asked how the morning was, and I told her this bush would be better next month because of what I was taking from it now. She asked if I had seen Evan's videos, and I said yes. She said he did not expect what he saw, and I told her expectations are just blindfolds we tie on ourselves. She said he was shaken. I said that happens in halls that echo what we forget we have said. She was quiet for a stretch that felt like a hand gripping a rail. She asked if I felt vindicated. I said no. I said truth has no sugar. It is water. Sometimes it refreshes you. Sometimes it shows you the crack in your cup. She took that in the way she takes in anything that might be a parable and asked if she should check on him. I said let him walk it off. I said let the hallway finish its lesson before the kitchen starts a new one. The phone clicked to another message from Evan unspooling before my eyes. A closer shot of the frosted sigil on the glass doors. His reflection faint and stretched by the frosting so that he looked like a man older than he is. I remembered being that age and seeing my own reflection in a place that did not owe me anything and thinking hard about the size of my mouth. Halls are honest in ways a mirror never is. They show you yourself and the institution that will not bend to accommodate your posture. The next clip caught a stray remark from someone behind him. Wonder who this Whitaker is. Someone else answered, I think he is the reason we still have a Monday. They laughed in that relieved way people laugh when the ship they work on finally stops taking water in through the seams. The camera dropped, and all I could see was the carpet pattern and the sway of the tote bag strap against his knee. The carpet has a way of swallowing footsteps. You have to listen carefully to know which direction someone is headed. I set the phone down again and returned to the roses. A single hornet inspected my wrist and decided I was not sweet enough to bother. I cut a blooming cane back to the fifth leaf and thought about the invisible agreement in rooms like that. The company promises not to embarrass what built it. The people promise to become part of the structure instead of treating it like a prop. It is not romance. It is not charity. It is how things stand when they intend to stand. Another message arrived, a photo of his onboarding tote on the floor by his shoes. The notebook opened to a page where someone had printed a sentence about humility. I looked at his handwriting where he had copied the line out of obligation and saw the small hesitation stroke where his pen paused over the word humility before it went on. You can read a man by where his pen pauses. In the afternoon, I wiped the shears with oil and put them back where they live. The phone lay quiet now as if morning had exhausted its need to speak. I brewed tea and let it cool until the glass felt honest in my hand. The house was a shade darker without asking permission. I replayed the first clip once just to catch the sound of the projector fan. Some noises never get old. They tell you people are trying to learn something together. I did not send advice. I did not send a lesson. I let the video do what truth does best when it is left alone. It lands where it wants and builds where it can. If he needed to talk, I would be here. If he needed to think, I would be quiet. My thumb hovered over the call button and then did not press. The light moved across the sink and turned the water into a single brief ribbon of gold. I went outside and checked the cut stems again to make sure they were clean. In time, the plant will show whether I chose well. In time, a young man will discover whether a name in bronze teaches him to respect the wall or to look for a crowbar. We broke bread on this table. Today we set terms on it. The oak holds knife marks from birthdays and a ring where a pot once forgot its trivet. I set 3 stacks in the center and squared their corners with the same care I use for photographs. Green clip on ethics, gray clip on the will, amber on mentorship. The house kept the kind of quiet that says, listen before you speak. Nora arrived first with grocery bags and the apology she brings for things that are not her fault. She set down lemons and a loaf of bread and touched the table like you touch a shoulder before a hard talk. Evan came a minute later with a smile that wanted a yes before it earned one. He sat across from me as if distance could be negotiated with chairs. I told them why we were here. Plain language. Calm water. Family has access to values, not vaults. That is the structure, that is the spine. Evan leaned back and let his hands find a steeple. I am family, he said, and the word family tried to carry more pounds than it was built for. That is why you are at the table, I said. The table is where we separate hunger from appetite. I slid the first stack forward. Green clip. Code of ethics in simple sentences any good house could adopt without hiring a lawyer. How we treat money when it enters the room. How we keep decisions out of the night where fear edits them. How we leave a paper trail you can hand a stranger without needing to explain away your own reflection. Nora read with the serious face she used to bring to school forms. Evan scanned the headings like a man checking a menu for words he already likes. I slid the second stack forward. Gray clip. The will as it stands, not open for debate, not a question with hands waving behind it. Who carries what responsibility when I cannot? How we honor Elise in the rules she wrote with me when there was still time to disagree about commas. There is nothing glamorous about a will. It is a map you draw for people who will be lost for a while. I asked them both to read the short version first so they could leave with the shape, even if they do not yet know the side streets. I slid the third stack forward. Amber. This one was just for Evan, and it was not money. It was a seat held open in a mentorship program I helped design for people who want a career to fit them better than a title does. The conditions were honest. No strings, no special favors, no board introductions. Real work, real coaching. 6 months of someone whose job is to remove shortcuts and hand you a tool instead. Evan's eyes softened a shade. He smiled like a man offered a jacket that actually fits his shoulders. He asked what the catch was. There is no catch, I said. There is a cost. You will be uncomfortable often and correct more quietly than you are used to. He laughed once and then grew thoughtful. He said he did not want charity. This is not charity, I said. This is a corridor with lights and doors. You still have to walk. He put a fingertip on the green stack. He said transparency builds trust and tried to make the words sound new. Trust builds transparency when it is earned, I said. And he nodded as if his mouth had met that sentence before and wanted a truce this time. He asked if the code required signatures. It does, I said, but not today. It requires a decision first. A pen is not a conviction. It is an instrument. Nora asked the question that matters. What happens if we break the code? You name it, I said. You fix it without a story about how you meant well. You lose privileges for a time if you break it twice. You do not lose love. You do not lose your place at the table. She breathed like someone handed a heavy box and then took half the weight back. Evan turned to the gray stack and looked at the page that lists powers and duties and what words mean when two people disagree about them. He asked why the will stays closed to revision. Because it was written when the air was clear, I said. Because grief makes editors out of people who should not be given red ink. He looked from the page to my face and found no lever there. He set the gray stack aside and took up the amber. He asked who the mentors were. People who have built something that does not require applause, I said. He asked if any of them sit on the board. That is not the point, I said. He asked what the schedule looked like and whether the meetings were at times that assumed other people did not have full calendars. He was still trying to be clever, and I let him without rewarding it. He asked what we call this whole arrangement. The kitchen papers, I said. He frowned at the homeliness of it and then smiled because he saw what I meant. This is where the work gets done and the dishes get clean. We paused for water. Nora sliced a lemon and the room filled with the kind of bright that does not strain the eyes. The refrigerator hummed its low sermon about consistency. I waited. Evan folded his hands as if he were about to pray and then remembered he prefers to negotiate. He said he could sign the code in principle. He said he needed time on the will. He said the mentorship made sense, and then he tripped on the next sentence which wanted me to make a call for him. I told him the number is printed on the packet. He will make it himself if he wants the seat. He nodded like a man who has been told the gym will not do his push-ups. He asked if there was a version of this where he served temporarily as co-trustee to learn the ropes. No, I said. He pivoted. Then perhaps an advisory role with visibility but no vote. No, I said again, and smiled to make it clear the no was not a punishment. The kitchen papers do not create ceremonies. They clarify responsibility. He touched the green stack again and asked if the code applied to me. I said it started here. He asked if the mentorship applied to me. I said it did once and still does when I forget what I teach. He took that in with a slow nod. Nora read the final page of the gray stack a second time and then closed her eyes the way Elise used to when she came to a decision she did not love but trusted. She placed her palm flat on the oak. She said thank you for drawing a map. Then she signed the acknowledgement that she has read and understood the structure. It is not a contract for her behavior. It is a promise to tell the truth when she strays. Evan held the pen like a prop. He clicked it once. He clicked it again. The sound was small, but it tapped the ribs of the room. He set the pen down and pushed the stacks back across the table with a care that tried to read as respect. He said he wanted to think overnight. He said he would call the mentorship number in the morning and that he would read the code away from the pressure of the room. He said he was committed to being a family man and a leader, and he said both phrases like slogans he was still trying to learn how to live. The pen lay on its side and rested. The refrigerator filled the silence with its steady hum. Outside, a car door thumped and a neighbor greeted someone without needing to raise a voice. We sat with the quiet long enough for it to mean something. Then I gathered the stacks and slipped each into a slim envelope with its colored clip still visible like a flag over a fort. At the door, Evan shook my hand and squeezed too hard the way men do when they think strength can be measured in one motion. He said we are close. I said we are clear. He flinched and recovered and thanked me for the opportunity. Nora hugged me like a person who knows the difference between a boundary and a wall. When the house was mine again, I washed the lemon knife and dried it till it squeaked. I set the pen back in its dish. I labeled the envelopes lightly with a pencil so the words could be erased if we needed to try again later. On the counter, I wrote a note to myself and underlined the only part that mattered. Boundaries are love with a spine. In the other room, my phone vibrated and stilled. A calendar alert rolled up the screen and faded. The kitchen kept its even temperature. The oak held the last warmth of our hands. I left the envelopes in the center of the table so morning would find them where the light is best. Doors look unlocked to the impatient. I learned that a long time ago in buildings where the carpet swallows footsteps and the glass does not forgive fingerprints. That morning I was rinsing a mug when my phone hummed across the counter. Unknown number. The kind that belongs to a switchboard before a person. I let it ring once more so my hands could be clean. Graham Whitaker here. A pause that felt like a nod traveled the line. Robert Knoll from Northbridge. His voice carried the weight of a man who knows the difference between a gust and a front. We can escalate. He let the sentence sit as if it might unfold a second clause by itself. I asked what wind he was measuring. He said a vice president had received an exploratory call from a new hire sounding out influence. The phrasing was careful. No accusation. A hint of proximity. An interest in access to the board before the work had a chance to speak. He did not say Evan. He did not have to. The carpet hears patterns. In another part of the city, a different phone was lit by a sun it had not earned. Evan stood in a hallway with glass on 3 sides and talked as if the glass were brick. He asked about pathways and visibility and how soon a driven person could be placed near decisions. He used the word fast as if it were a credential. The vice president listened with the patient hum of a machine that has run in this building longer than Evan has owned a key card. The answer was polite and precise. Do the work. Pass the bar the rest of us passed. Shadow the right meetings without trying to rearrange the room. Back in my kitchen, the line was steady. Noel said the VP had come to legal not for permission to swat a fly, but to confirm the screens were working. We can escalate. He repeated it with the neutrality of a fire marshal. My answer came without hurry. Or we can elevate. He did not miss the pivot. He asked what elevate looks like in a place that cannot afford to make examples and cannot afford to make exceptions. I told him, doors look unlocked to the impatient, and sometimes the answer is a better sign rather than a thicker lock. New hire coaching. Influence and integrity. Teach the shape of the doorway and the reason the hinges sit where they do. Let the lesson arrive before the rumor. Noel was quiet for one breath. The conference speakerphone light on his end likely glowed a small white circle in a room built for longer conversations than this. He said they could build a session by next week if I thought it would answer the question before the question wrote itself into behavior. He asked what tone. I said not punitive, not soft. Something that tells the room we value speed that carries load rather than speed that rattles the frame. He said he would draft a note. He said it would go out from HR and legal together because the spine of a culture runs through both. He said we could loop in the mentorship program if there was a fit. I told him a corridor with lights and doors is always a fit, and that sometimes a man needs to learn the difference between a hallway and a shortcut. While we spoke, I pictured Evan in a glass corner with his phone angled just so. I could see him tapping a toe as he waited for the VP to blink. I could hear him using the word access the way a man uses a lever before learning where the fulcrum actually sits. The VP thanked him for his energy and invited him to a standing meeting open to all new hires who want to see how decisions are framed before they are signed. Evan said he appreciated the transparency. He meant he would still look for a side door. Noel cleared his throat with the civility that makes legal men hard to dislike. We can escalate if that is your preference. He was offering me a knob I did not need to turn. Or we can elevate, I said again, and let the repetition make its own case. He exhaled a smile I could hear. Then elevate we will. We ended the call with no drama. The microwave dinged because I had forgotten the oatmeal I did not really want. I poured coffee and watched the ring spread to the edge of the mug like a patient tide. An Outlook invite blinked into the screen while the steam curled and vanished. Coaching. Influence and Integrity. Host Lila Moreno. Co-host Robert Noel. Attendees new hire cohort. Optional mentors welcome. The line at the bottom read, "Please come ready to listen more than you speak." I clicked accept and the calendar changed color. The house held a small contentment the way a jacket holds the warmth of the person who just left the room. Mercy that teaches is stronger than fear that silences. I did not write that anywhere. I let it sit between the coffee and the keyboard. Later that morning, Nora stopped by for a charger she had left on the counter. She asked how the day was going, and I told her the building downtown was learning a new song. She smiled because she knows I talk in riddles when I cannot or will not name the characters. She said she had heard the new hire group would get a special session. She said Evan was grousing about the calendar being heavy. I asked how he was otherwise. She said quieter than usual. I said quiet is a good starting place for a lesson. In his office, Evan stared at the invite and tried to decide whether optional meant optional. He texted someone from his cohort a question that did not wear the question mark. He set the phone down and picked it up again. He toggled to the to-do list he had assembled based on dreams, not process. He said out loud that he did not need orientation to teach him what he plans to do to the market. The empty room did not argue. The VP who had taken his call earlier forwarded the invite with a short line at the top that said, "Catch this if you can." He added one sentence I recognized from a dozen good managers I have known. Invest in the rules that will carry you when your charm gets tired. Back in my kitchen, I leaned against the counter and let the coffee do its work. The house likes this time of day. The mail has not yet come to demand decisions. The sun has not yet made promises it cannot keep. I opened the refrigerator, closed it without taking anything, and listened to the hum settle again. The speakerphone light that had been a ring in my mind dimmed to a memory. The word escalate fell away like a coat no one needed now that the weather had clarified itself. Email rolled across the screen in its calm procession. Session confirmed. The subject line did not shout. The body of the message did not sell. It named the room. It named the hour. It named the purpose. We honor quiet partners. We train visible ones. Bring your questions. Leave with a map. I thought of Evan seeing the words in his inbox and deciding which kind of man he would be this week. The kind who treats a map like an insult, or the kind who learns how to read one that was drawn before he bought shoes that shine. I do not get to choose that for him. I only get to choose whether the corridor is lit when he finally decides to walk. The microwave kept its counsel. The coffee cooled to something truthful. I sent a single line to Noel that said thank you for the steady hand. He replied with a period and a promise. We will keep the floor level. Outside, a delivery truck hissed and sighed and moved on. I put the mug in the sink and turned on the tap. Water found the drain it always finds. Somewhere downtown, a young man looked at an invite and a mirror, and then at a door he thought was unlocked. Somewhere else, a lawyer dimmed the speakerphone light and wrote the word elevate in a margin that no one will see. Glass shows you twice, your face and what you are facing. I felt both the second I stepped into the town hall. Light poured off the paneled wall as if the room preferred reflection to decoration. The crowd was already standing shoulder to shoulder, tote bags at their feet, the low, warm murmur people make when they expect a show and get a meeting instead. I took the side aisle the way I always do. No rush, no announcement. A black binder in my hand because paper behaves better when it has weight. Lila Moreno opened with the kind of welcome that calms a room without lowering its voltage. She spoke of maps and milestones and the strange gift of starting where others left off. The projector hummed like a steady engine. My eyes adjusted to the sheen of the glass behind the stage. In it, I could see a second room layered over the first, faces in the audience, my own outlined by the wing, several rows in a familiar posture, Evan looking forward with that lean that hopes the future will meet him halfway if he tilts far enough. Priya Shah crossed to the center with her notes folded in half. She does not waste a page. She does not waste a moment. She held the room with simple sentences that did not need to be sold. Our firm was carried through a hard season by people who chose clarity over comfort. We are here because someone believed in compliance before it was convenient. The slide behind her shifted to our turnaround. Not dramatic, a timeline, a photo from a winter no one wants to relive, the bronze wall in a corner, names that hold the building up and never tell you so. I felt the bind of the lavalier as the tech clipped it to my collar in the wing. He mouthed ready, and I nodded once. 2 minutes. Say only what the work can carry. In the glass, I could see Evan again. He was not smiling. He was not angry either. He was listening with the kind of stillness men practice when they want to be seen as prepared. I remembered the kitchen papers on my table and let the image pass like a cloud. This room was not for family business. This room was for institutional memory. Priya set her notes down and looked toward the wing. She gave a short introduction without ornaments. She thanked a partner by name. Cedarline Holdings. She named the role I hold. Chair's advisor. She said it plainly the way a supervisor reads a roster. No drum roll. A few heads turned. A few hands began to come together until they remembered themselves and waited. I stepped out. 2 steps, and the floor found me. The mic was a small coin at my collarbone. The glass showed me as one more figure walking into place. I did not look for Evan, but I knew where he was. You can feel attention the way you feel sun on the back of your neck. I set the black binder on the lectern and did not open it. I have learned that written words behave best when you leave them behind and speak the spine out loud. We build with what will not be seen, discipline and the humility to learn. That is the only sentence I had promised myself to say. I let it stand there a moment so it could pick up its own weight. I looked at the new faces, and then at the ones who had been here through storms. I told them a company does not get better because a few people learn to run faster. It gets better because many people decide to carry correctly. I told them apprenticeship was not a favor but a frame, a way to hang a career where integrity will not sag under its own success. I told them the company had chosen a long time ago to tell the truth to its own paperwork, and that decision had saved their Monday. The room did not cheer. It breathed. I spoke for less than the 2 minutes. You know when a thing has landed because saying more would only step on the silence. The mic caught a last consonant and the tech dimmed it. Priya thanked me with a nod and turned back to the slide that explained how to request a mentor without telling a story about your potential. In the glass, I caught one more glimpse of the row where Evan sat. His face had lost the angle that asks for a shortcut. His hands were still. He was counting something, maybe breaths, maybe steps between where he was and where the wall said he could go. The applause came at the end of the segment, not for me, for the program. It sounded like rain on glass, soft at first and then filling the surface until it felt like weather. I stepped back into the wing, and the noise slid off the paneled wall, as if water prefers the easiest path home. The tech unclipped the mic. "Thank you," he said, the way a craftsman thanks a tool for not misbehaving. I picked up the binder. Priya moved on to a chart that would matter more tomorrow than it did now. I slipped out the side door the way I came in. The hallway smelled like clean air and dry carpet. A few new hires were gathered by the bronze wall taking photos of names because it felt like proof that a building can appreciate what holds it up. I passed without stopping. The exit folded me into a service corridor where the noise turned into a steady background like a highway heard from a field. I pushed through a final door and the afternoon hit me with all the honesty of open air. The parking lot felt bigger than the room. Sun on concrete. A gull that had no business this far inland complaining about a French fry it did not get. I leaned a shoulder against the brick and let the loudest thing be the quiet in my chest. The reveal had been what it needed to be, not a performance, not a sentence weighted like a gavel. The truth had been placed where it belonged and left to do its work. I did not wait for anyone. The only people I stop for after a meeting like that are the kind who want to ask how to show up better. Those conversations take 5 minutes and change 5 years. I walked to my car and unlocked it with the familiar click that tells a day it is moving to its next shape. In the glass of the window, I saw a faint reflection of myself, and behind me the building that would be here when all of us were done trying to matter in it. A shadow moved at the corner of my sight, and I half expected Evan to come out at a jog, all apology and energy and a question about dinner. He did not. He stayed inside where the echo still had work to do. That was right. The lesson belongs to the room before it belongs to any of us. I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door softly. The sound made a small cocoon. Hands on the wheel. Binder on the passenger seat. The air vents sighed and went still. On the way out, I passed the front entrance and caught a glimpse through the glass of people standing the line, moving the slow stream of a cohort that would one day be a culture. The bronze wall was there in the corner with its names in the light. You would miss it if you were busy. You would miss it if you thought names exist to be said out loud. The best ones do their talking from a distance. At the red light, I let memory play the evening back to me in a short reel. Priya's line about compliance before it was convenient. Lila's steadying presence, a slide that did not try to sell, a binder I did not need, the mic that left no residue, Evan's face in the glass. Not pride, not shame, something rarer. Recognition without the heat of humiliation, a good beginning. The light changed and the tires rolled with a small voice on the asphalt. I headed home while the building behind me kept doing what it does best. It held. I cracked the window. Air folded into the cabin and took the edge off the day. The truth had landed in the only place it can survive without turning into theater. A room with bright glass and a sober agenda. Tomorrow would bring whatever tomorrow brings. A meeting request. A text without punctuation. A question about a door and whether it is truly locked. I drove past a row of maples, beginning to think about autumn. The leaves were not ready to commit yet. They held a little green in reserve. I respected that. Change done well is a disciplined thing. It starts inside where the color learns the shape it will take. Then it steps into the light and lets strangers notice. At sunrise, my coffee didn't taste like payback. It tasted like air. The mug was the porcelain one Elise favored, thin at the lip, warm in the hand. Morning slid through the blinds in measured bars and laid a soft ladder across the table. The envelopes waited where I had left them, pencil labels faint enough to erase if life asked us to start again. The house made those small friendly sounds that mean you are not alone even when you are. Nora pulled into the drive while the light was still gentle. She came up the steps with a hesitance I recognized from school mornings when she was small and unsure whether a test would be kind. We sat on the porch where the boards keep the memory of every season. She wrapped both hands around her mug and watched the steam shape itself, then disappear. She said she should have said something at that dinner. I told her the room did not need a hero, it needed a memory, and we had finally given it one. She asked if I was tired of being steady. I told her steadiness is lighter than anger once you learn where to set it down. She slid the kitchen papers from her bag and laid them on her knees. Green on top, then gray, then the receipt that proves you showed up for a moment that did not ask for applause. She read for a while without moving her mouth. Then she reached for the pen like you reach for a door you already know opens inward. She signed the acknowledgement with a calm that made my chest loosen. She tapped the page once and said, "This is not punishment, it is a path." I nodded because the right sentences do not need echo. She told me Evan did not sleep much. She told me the town hall had moved something he could not name without knocking something else over. She touched the corner of the gray envelope and let her hand fall back into her lap. She said she would stand with me in whatever came next. The light shifted a fraction and the railing caught it like a patient instrument. Evan arrived a few minutes later without the practiced brightness he carries when he wants to be seen as inevitable. He looked older in the morning, which is not a criticism. Mornings tell the truth and are kind about it. He took the chair beside Nora and set his phone face down as if it were a bird he had finally agreed not to teach to sing. He said he had watched the recording of the session twice. He said he had been embarrassed by his questions all week and then realized embarrassment was not the correct word. He said recognition fit better. I slid the amber envelope toward him but did not touch it to his hand. I told him there are 2 doors and neither is locked. The first is boundaries and mentorship and the slow work of becoming exactly as capable as you say you are. The second is distance and a clean break from any expectation that family money will solve what character should. I told him I could not buy his integrity, but I could make room for it. He breathed out and looked at the grass like it might offer a third option. The yard said nothing. Yards are good that way. He said he thought access was love. He said it as if confessing to a teacher who has seen too many versions of the same mistake to be cruel about any of them. I said love is access to better choices. He nodded as if a key had turned in a lock he did not know was there. He asked if the mentorship seat was still open. I told him I do not hold doors. I oil them and stand out of the way. He smiled without showing teeth and said he would call before noon. Nora placed her palm on the gray stack and looked at me with the kind of question that is really a gratitude. She asked if I wanted witnesses. I said I wanted participants. Evan lifted the green pages and read the code like a man reading a map he used to pretend he didn't need. He asked how we made amends when we break it. We name it, I said. We fix it with the truth. We lose privileges if we turn a mistake into a habit. We do not lose each other. He turned to the last page and held the pen like a tool, not a prop. He hesitated in the honest way a hand pauses at the hinge to make sure it will hold. He signed his name in the line that forgets drama by design. He set the pen down and did not click it. The refrigerator inside hummed as if the house approved. We moved to the small desk by the window because paperwork prefers a flat surface and a working printer. I slid the acknowledgement pages into the tray. The printer woke as if stretching. It whirred the way a machine does when it has one job and takes it seriously. Copies slid out warm and smelling faintly of new. I stamped the envelope for the apprentice's fund expansion and laid it where the sun could dry the ink. Nora smiled at the stamp as if it represented a promise she could explain to a child. Evan asked what expansion meant in practical terms. I told him more seats, more tools, more Mondays that do not feel like a cliff. We drank coffee in the kitchen and let small topics prove we could be ordinary again. Nora described a plant on her desk that refuses to quit. Evan admitted onboarding forms are less boring when you decide they matter. I rinsed the mugs and set them on the towel like small white boats waiting for a tide. The kettle clicked a tired little click and went still. Nora gathered the signed pages and slid them into fresh sleeves. She wrote the date in neat block letters because dates are where memory learns to tell time. Evan looked around the kitchen like a tourist, suddenly learning the language of a city he has been living in for months. He said the house felt like a rule you wanted to follow. I said houses hold the shape their people practice. He stood and asked if he could say one more thing without breaking the morning. He said he would not have found this door if I had slammed another one. He said there is a version of last week where he was punished into silence and he would have chosen spite over growth. He said I had left the corridor lit. I said the corridor will still be there on days he forgets where he is going. He nodded and tapped the mentorship packet against his knee like a man testing the weight of a tool. Before they left, we stepped back onto the porch because light loves wood and conversations end better outdoors. The blinds drew pale lines across the floor where a small breeze moved the day forward. Nora hugged me and let the hug last. Evan shook my hand and did not squeeze too hard. He said he would check in after the coaching session. I said be early and sit where you can see the questions coming. They drove away without music. The street returned to its regular heartbeat. I sealed the stamped envelope and dropped it in the box for the mail to make honest. I sat at the desk and sent the email I had promised myself I would send when this day arrived. Expansion proposal attached timeline modest metrics, simple seat count increased to meet the need we already knew was there. The message left the outbox and softened into the past. I watched the printer sleep again and the light tiptoe across the counter. The house had nothing more to say, and that was its gift. Justice does not always shout. Sometimes it signs its name, prints 2 copies, and walks a young man to a better door. The mug cooled. The air grew brighter. I could hear a neighbor laughing on a call and a dog discovering the same patch of sun it finds every morning. I went to the table and gathered the envelopes. The green and gray went into a file labeled in my plain hand. The amber I left near the door where an eager person might reach for it without looking. I opened the blinds another inch and let the day all the way in. Breath in, breath out. The coffee had gone from warm to honest. I finished it anyway because honest is a flavor you learn to like if you live long enough. There was nothing dramatic left to do. That felt like the point. The future would test whether a signature meant a decision or only a mourning. I believed in the first more than the second. I believed in the simple arithmetic of a room that adds up when people choose the sum over the spotlight. On the porch rail, the sun made a thin, bright coin that stayed for a count of 3 and then slipped away. I stood and washed the mug and put it where Elise used to put it, rim down, ready for another ordinary beginning. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.